with its responsibilities steadily declining as better aircraft became available. In a sense, the B.E.2 inspired the first generation of fighters by displaying all of the qualities that no one wanted in a fighter aircraft, including poor visibility, poor reliability, difficulty of control, slow speed, and weak armament. The advent of the Fokker and Decker made the B.E.2 positively hazardous to fly. Refinements often hurt more than they helped, with the plane becoming steadily more dangerous and accident-prone as it grew heavier. It's tough to give a failing grade to a first effort. But the B.E.2's difficulty and poor reliability, combined with the British decision to keep it in service well beyond its freshness date, earn it a spot on this list. Incidentally, the failure of the Royal Flying Corps to effectively substitute for the B.E.2 in a timely fashion provided much grist for early advocates of the Royal Air Force, the world's first independent air force. A short, squat, and unattractive aircraft, the Buffalo entered service in the same year as the Mitsubishi A6M0 and the Bf-109, two overwhelmingly superior aircraft. Intended to serve as both a land and carrier-borne fighter, the Buffalo saw its first combat in Finnish service, as several were transferred from the United States after the Winter War. Weight increases during the design process included provisions for heavier armament, extra fuel, and armor plating. Unfortunately, these left the airframe dreadfully underpowered, unable to keep up or maneuver with its best contemporaries. Although the Buffaloes operated by the Finnish Air Force did well against the Soviets in the early days of the Continuation War, Buffalo pilots serving in Commonwealth and Dutch air forces in Southeast Asia were massacred by Japanese flyers in Zeros and Oscars. To add to its least desirable characteristics, the Buffalo performed poorly in the high temperatures common in the tropics. Marine Corps pilots referred to the Buffalo as, you guessed it, a flying coffin in the wake of the Battle of Midway, where the aircraft performed disastrously against the Japanese. It was quickly replaced in U.S. service by its far more effective counterpart, the Grumman F-4F Wildcat. Military modernization is often about timing, and the Soviet Union of the 1930s rebuilt its military industries slightly too quickly, optimizing production around technologies that would fall a step behind foreign contemporaries. The Laji G3, first flew in 1940 but developed from the Laji G1, was the Soviet Air Force's premier fighter during the German invasion of 1941, and was such a disaster that, playing on the fighter's acronym, pilots referred to it as the Varnished Guaranteed Coffin. Although it entered service 5 years after the Bf-109, the Laji G3 was essentially hopeless in combat against its contemporary. It unfortunately combined lightweight wood construction with an underpowered engine, which meant that it struggled to gain tactical advantage against heavier German fighters, yet went to pieces when hit. Combined with desperate Soviet pilot training practices of the war, there's little surprise as to how German and Finnish aviators gained such remarkably high totals against their Soviet opponents. Production of the Laji G3 should have ended in 1942, but the agility of the Soviet military-industrial complex being what it was, continued until 1944. Picking a candidate from the Century series was a struggle. Most of the Century series aircraft were developed while the Air Force was still dominated by the strategic bombing cadre, and interested primarily in the prospects of nuclear combat with the Soviet Union. Tactical Air Command tried to resolve this problem by making itself as strategic as possible, focusing on interceptors that could catch and kill Soviet bombers, and also on fighters heavy enough to deliver nuclear weapons. This left the fighters of the USAF poorly equipped to tangle with the tiny, maneuverable MiGs deployed by the PAVNAF. The series was not a complete disaster. The F-100 was an adequate second-generation fighter, the F-106 an entirely capable interceptor. The rest had the sort of troubles expected of a misaligned set of strategic and technological concepts. The McDonnell F-101 Voodoo was an interceptor converted into a fighter bomber, a combination that made nearly no sense. It would mostly see service as a recon aircraft. The Convair F-102 Delta Dagger performed inadequately as both an interceptor and a fighter bomber, briefly seeing combat in Vietnam before turning in its most notable service as a remote-control target drone. The Lockheed F-104 Starfighter was fast, beautiful, and a death trap, earning the Flying Coffin nickname while suffering over 30 mishaps per 100,000 flight hours. It was also known as the missile with a man in it. Over 50% of F-104s in Canadian service were lost in crashes, over 30% in German. The enormous Republic F-105 Thunderchief deserved better. Designed as a nuclear bomber, it was ill-suited to the conventional bombing mission forced by the Vietnam War, and became easy prey to the Frescos, Fishbeds, and SA-2S. The aircraft of the Century series had different builders, and were intended to perform different missions. However, they were procured in enormous quantities, and all suffered from problems associated with the same cause: the inability of the United States Air Force to conceptualize warfare outside of the strategic realm. The MiG-23 was supposed to be the Soviet answer to the big American fighters such as the F-4 and F-111, a powerful swing-wing fighter that could also perform attack and interception roles. And the Flogger surely was powerful. But the Flogger was a beast to fly and to maintain. American Red Eagle pilots, tasked with determining the capabilities of Soviet aircraft, considered the Flogger a disaster waiting to happen. In 1984, Lieutenant General Robert M. Bond died flying a USAF-operated Flogger. A relatively large aircraft, the Flogger also